Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good.
We're going to do what we always do, solve another problem.
Untangle the
I
dots.
hope we're better than these people in government. You know, when they create a problem and then they get sent in to solve them, Mises said, watch out, because if they start messing around with trying to correct their mistakes, you end up with a lot more mistakes. I hope we can work it in the opposite direction, you know, reveal what's going on, and maybe we'll start shrinking the size of government.
That's an idea.
But I think it's going to eventually shrink, but it's going to be sort of after they destroy the whole thing, and then we'll have a chance to introduce some old-fashioned ideas about freedom. But there was an incident, I don't even think it's been a week now, but people are suffering from, and that has to do with the gasoline lines, Columbia gas line. And all of a sudden, like 43% of all the gasoline in the eastern part of the country no longer have it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the 70s, you know, having inflation and gasoline lines and all this activity. So. But this is a big deal. Prices are going up. Naturally, that's what it should be. But what surprised me, though, when this was announced, and I don't know the answer to this, but maybe it's just that you've conditioned me to be suspicious of so much. No, I was thinking, you know, they announced the line was hacked and it was closed down, and within that same. The first time I heard the announcement, which was really early, they said the Russians did it. The Russians did it. And I thought, you know, I wonder if I could take that evidence to court. And after a bit, the Russians said, no, they didn't do it. But it is a big deal. And I got to thinking, you know, why do things like this happen? How come we had this lockdown for a year and a half that destroyed so much economic activity? And why was it supported by business people?
Yeah.
There were so many business people. And the one that stands out is, why does an owner of a baseball team lock out their people? Because sometimes they didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
So this is, but why do the business people look like they're doing damage to themselves? So in thinking about this, I thought, well, what is going on here? Because we do know there's a rule in Washington, if there is some type of emergency, don't let it go to waste. You know, make use of it. Use it to build your power and authority in Washington. The question, though, is, and I think that we don't know the answer, and it's a pretty wild thought anyway, and that is, could this have been done deliberately? I really don't think that's it, but they did this. They participated in deliberately closing down, you know, the whole economy.
Yeah.
But the argument was it was they had the moral high ground. We're going to save lives. Turns out they didn't save lives. They probably caused more loss of lives, and we're still suffering from that. But anyway, it happened, and I think they will take advantage of this. And you know, I got to thinking, well, how does this work into passport? Well, if this shortage is if they're really, really bad, they'll have to ration things, you know, and you might have to have a passport to buy your gasoline. You know, that is not totally off the top because they're capable of doing that. They're not quite geared up for that, but the goal is to manage everything, and they can't manage the people if they can't control the people, and they don't know where you are, and they know how you spend your money and all these things. But I think that this is going to be a mess, and the people who want to have a mess, they're going to benefit. If they want to build more fear, then they're going to start talking about the Russians did it. It looks like we might have to declare war, you know, if they did this. And yet, I was slightly surprised that, not surprised they blame somebody. They have to blame somebody. So I thought maybe they blame the Chinese, but I guess that particular day the Chinese were going to get off the hook, but the Russians have denied it. So I don't think we do know how that happened. Is it just a computer error, or did somebody hack it and do it, and who are they that did it? And there'll be a lot of speculations. And if there's a benefit to the conspirators and the people who want to control the world and control us, if they can build up fear and say, this is what we have to do, don't put it past them. They're capable of doing that.
Yeah, well, you know, Dr. Paul, it's as predictable as mosquitoes after a Lake Jackson rainstorm, isn't it? Because it not only, I mean, they barely finished the first reporting of this so-called ransomware hack of the Colonial Pipeline when you heard Russia,
Yeah.
you know, and I happened to be at the gym, and I don't know why, I'm a creature of habit. I always work out under the MSNBC TV. It's really dumb because it makes my blood boil. Maybe it makes me run faster, but the MSNBC, there they were, trotting out all of its usual suspects, all the people who put out the lies over and over again about Russiagate lies. The same guy, this former FBI officer, all these guys, the same people over and over again. It was the Russians, it was the Russians, it was the Russians. No evidence that it was the Russians. No evidence is ever presented that it's the Russians. Might it be? It could be. But what it really looks like more is kind of what they said in the beginning. It's ransomware for hire. They go in and they steal the codes or whatever. I'm not a computer expert. And they say, hey, give us $1 million or $10 million and we'll release the codes to you and you can go back in business. That's what it looks like. Biden himself, of course, spoke out of both sides of his mouth. He said, so far there's no evidence from our intelligence people that Russia is involved, although there is evidence that actors and the ransomware is in Russia, and that's questionable. But he said, nevertheless, they have some responsibility to deal with this, though. So the Russians, there's no evidence that it's their fault, but they're still responsible.
Yeah, but you know, and my concern is that, is there any chance that there's some type of connection or a coincidence about, you know, the economic mess that we have now? Where things were getting better,
starting to open up, yeah.
Starting to open up, and now you can't. If you want to go someplace and open up your travels, you can't get there. You don't have any gasoline.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes this spreads, and it's really at the same time that prices are going up,
yeah.
And they're saying, well, that's transitory, and they have their explanation for that. They never talk about, well, there was a lot of debt by Republicans and Democrats, and they went to the Fed, and the Fed printed all the money they needed, not a couple $100 billion, couple trillion here and a trillion there, daily another $1 trillion. So they're not going to talk about that. They're going to talk, well, the price of energy is going up, which it already started up to some degree, and it was destined to go up because of the price inflation that comes when you print a lot of money. So now this comes up and say, oh, you know, this is the reason we have it. Sort of like the problems. I still believe that the whole crisis that came out of coronavirus didn't have to be that bad, and it was a scheme because the downturn was already set in, and they cannot blame the government or the spending or the Federal Reserve. So they had to have something else, and they come up and they have somebody to blame, and this way, regardless, like I said, if it isn't, if there was no planning. It's just a plain old coincidence there. They'll make use of it, but they can. They're not going to soften up on our travel. They'll just make it more difficult to travel.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly should be out there. The other question we ask is who benefits? That's always the first question. And there's a big list of people that benefit from this. First of all, the Democrats, the diehards, because they've been pushing the Russia stories for, well, 4 years at least, you know, from before President Trump was elected. It certainly benefits them. The other thing it actually benefits, Dr. Paul, I'm sure you probably thought about this, is the CIA and the intelligence community. Because I saw several comments from right-wingers who are frustrated and furious over these woke ads that the CIA has been putting up, these intersectional, whatever it is, people that are talking about how wonderful it is to talk about your personal lifestyle while on the job at the CIA. They're saying, why is the CIA so busy making these woke commercials? They should be out protecting our pipelines. And that certainly is a benefit. People, oh, okay, the CIA would say, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. We'd like to do that. Even though, of course, it's a private pipeline. It's a privately done thing. And so it's really, it opens the door for more federal takeover of infrastructure in the U.S. So I'm sure the statists and the intelligence community types are not unhappy about this clamor for them to have even more power.
There was another accusation, and to me, I think it sounds like a stretch, that the people who are going to suffer the most from the shortages happen to live in red states.
Yeah, it looks like it.
But one thing they could control is, let's say they have a lot of trouble with this computer, and they need to string this out, and they'll have other ways of helping people. It's sort of like the bailouts in the sort of the routine downturns we have. We have the bailouts. Well, the bailouts with the gasoline can be distributed in a very direct way and send it to their friends, you know, which means that the states that will get it will be the blue state. That sounds, even for me, that sounds like it might be over the top, but that's the way they think.
Yeah.
Because if it's not practical, if it were practical, they might do it, because that's exactly the way they operate.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Russiagate and the blaming Russia for everything and the lies and deception, I think our second story that we want to talk a little bit about today fits in that category. And that's actually, just put up that first clip, because this was brought to our attention by Daniel Horowitz, who writes on The Blaze. But there was an amazing article. You'll never hear me say this very often, Dr. Paul. An amazing article in the New York Times, of all places, and Dan Horowitz wrote about it. Basically, the New York Times busted the CDC, who of course we're never supposed to question, for really putting out, they use the word misleading in their headlines, but Dan Horowitz calls it lies, and it really is lies. And basically, here it is in a nutshell, Dr. Paul. So, several weeks ago, the director Walensky, remember the one who was mortally terrified that we were going to all die, she stated at a White House press conference, and this is from the article, that there's increasing data that suggests most transmission is happening indoors rather than outdoors. Okay, we've known that from the beginning. She said less than 10% of documented transmission is from out of doors. So let's look at this next clip, because this is from the New York Times article. Less than 10%, but here's the good point. Saying that less than 10% of COVID transmission occurs outdoors is akin to saying that sharks attack fewer than 20,000 swimmers a year. The actual worldwide number is around 150. It's both true and deceiving, because the actual number is probably about 0.1% or less. And in fact, this is from the New York Times. This is not Conspiracy Central. This is New York Times, aside from their own conspiracies. But let's look at this next clip. This is New York Times. There is not a single documented COVID infection anywhere in the world from casual outdoor interactions, such as walking past someone on a street or eating at a nearby table. Not a single documented case. And Horowitz says, imagine what this past year would have been like if the CDC had not deceived Americans into thinking that anytime they walk outside, the Rona is going to come get you.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out why he found this in the New York Times.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Does that mean there's a spy for telling the truth, and they're in there, and how are they getting away? How are they getting by the truth seekers, the censors? And the censors look at this stuff, and it still got through. So boy, they're slipping up on the job. You know? The truth came out, but that I think will be an interesting question, because I can't believe that it's just an accident came through, or whether they're shifting their attitude. Did the New York Times just get sold again or something like that? Or did they have an accidental reporter in there that snuck it in at the last minute?
Well, Horowitz quoted the late Rush Limbaugh saying it was a random act of journalism.
Yeah,
just happened to occur.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But this is while the CDC is still telling kids, hey, if you're going to go to summer camp, you got to put on that mask. If you're going to go play soccer in the heat in the summer, you got to put on that mask because you might start breathing heavily. So even though the data absolutely contradicts what they've been saying, they continue to say it, they continue to double down.
But I think the crazier she gets and some of these proposals and the more this information gets out, the attitudes are changing. I think the people are sick and tired of this stuff. And I think there's a real opportunity here. Maybe in a couple of months from now, we will not have to be talking about the CDC, Dr. Fauci, or Bill Gates. Maybe they all have to leave. We've had enough of you guys. But nevertheless, this is once again, and the people respond, with great interest when you can point out the hypocrisies. So when they're saying one thing, and then they come along and they're doing exactly the opposite, and then they get caught in a lie. This is just not a mistake.
Yeah.
These are outright lies in order to fit into their scenario, and to keep the fear mongering going. And there's no other way to explain this. But the sad part, though, is that there's so much gullibility out there. So people are really gullible. If they just could remain, neutral on some of this stuff, it would be better. But no, they go along and they go into the fear, and they get so. Well, what if I don't give my son this shot, to give him the vaccine, and he gets sick? But what happens if you give it to him and he gets sick? And boy, those numbers are getting pretty bad. In that the numbers are really racking up. Numbers of deaths, actually. That one chart, I was going to do some more checking in. It just showed a tremendous boost of people who have died from vaccination in the last year.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a big fan of incarceration, Dr. Paul, but when the truth comes out, I wouldn't mind seeing some jail doors swing for some of these people. But here's something from Horowitz's piece, and I think this is the critical point. He said, the obvious question anyone should be asking is that if the CDC is exaggerating the need to wear masks outdoors, why are we to trust them about the efficacy of wearing them indoors? Both CDC and the WHO have recently admitted that the 6 foot rule is a complete hoax, and that it's primarily aerosols remaining suspended in the air indoors and traveling further than 6 feet that are transmitting the virus. And so to this question, so what makes us believe them when they say wear it indoors? Well, remember our clip from Scott Gottlieb yesterday when he said we should be removing the mask mandates indoors immediately. And this is the guy, former FDA director, a guy who's one of the biggest scaremongers about the virus. He sees which way things are turning, and he's changing his tune now too.
That sort of reminds me of my reason for not going and attending top secret reports, because they've lied to us before. So what makes me think I'm going to go in there and all of a sudden hear the truth? To me, it was always propaganda. Anyway, this is what we hear. They have their scenario and they keep pumping it out. But so many people believe it, and it is a desire. They have good intentions, but that doesn't solve your problems. That sometimes leads to more problems. They want to protect their children, and then they fall into the trap. Well, don't you think the people who would have the most interest in protecting the children would be the people who have dedicated their lives to the protection of children and the education of children, and they're well organized, and they have these groups of people, they're called unions, and they get together for the protection of the children, and look at the results of that. So there's a lot of pressure put on that, and the teachers, well, there's more of them now that are speaking out against it, but it's a real struggle.
Yeah, it is. Well, speaking of the truth starting to come out, we can't pass this up. Yesterday, I don't know I'm sure you were on the internet. The internet was completely lit up over a little exchange between a couple people we know pretty well. One of them happens to be a senator from Kentucky, and the other happens to be the leading fearmonger in the country, Dr. Fauci. Let's cue up that little clip. This will just give you a little flavor of how spicy the exchange was, right? How it was almost a cage match. But we're gonna find. Here's just a little portion of the senator questioning Fauci yesterday.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute
Do they
of
fund
Virology.
Dr. Barrick?
We do not fund
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain of function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain of function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines.
Well, Fauci did not look happy to be talking to Senator Paul. But the point was, why is the NIH supporting these gain-of-function experiments at all? And if you notice Fauci's response here, first he said, we don't fund it at all. And Rand said, do you fund this particular scientist who does it? He says, well, he doesn't do it. And if he does, it's within the guidelines. So this is the whole nature of the exchange. But it raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know, listening to the two of them, and that's maybe the third or fourth time that this has come about, and Rand just happens to be on that committee that deals with the health matter.
I'm sure he loves that.
So, a libertarian doctor to have to compete with that guy.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But you know, the thought that crossed my mind when I was listening to that, I mean, the impossible things. You know, there was a time, conditions were different. When I first went to Washington, Tip O'Neill, you know, was the speaker, and Ronald Reagan was the president in the early '80s, and they had their little contest going on, political, but it was so different.
Yeah.
And the story is that they snuck out together, and after it was all over, they thought, well, this is important, but it's also important that at 5 o'clock you relax.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, you know what, I've never asked Rand about that, but my guess is I don't think those two guys sneak out
They don't hang out.
afterwards and try to relax a bit.
They're not buds, I don't think.
So,
But, you know, after the exchange, because Fauci denied and denied and denied it, and Senator Paul put up many tweets because he was really backing up what he said. He and his staff have done their homework, and they knew before they went in there. You always have to know the answers to the questions before you ask them, and they did. Let's put up this tweet. This is just an example of many that the senator put out yesterday on this issue. Dr. Fauci dissembled or tried to hide his longtime support for gain-of-function research, which creates super viruses that jump from animals to humans. 11 labs in the U.S. create these super viruses in the U.S., and one of them collaborated with Wuhan Virology Institute. Fauci has supported NIH funds for all of these labs. Brings up several questions. One, why did Fauci basically lie to Senator Paul when he was on the stand? And the other is, why are we involved in this?
yeah, matter of fact, yeah, I don't understand what they expect to gain from this. This sounds very sinister. You know, it sounds like human experimentation, trying to take a virus and make it more dangerous and see how you can get it to transfer to a human being.
Great idea.
I mean, I think they had some of that stuff in the 1940s that they were doing,
Yeah.
and it was horrible. And physicians were participating in it too, all that experimentation on human beings. But for the life of me, I cannot understand what they think they're going to gain from this. Since we've been talking about this for a year and a half, it seems to me like the people, generally speaking, need more information about nutrition, and that's a little bit safer than going in here and talking about gain of function, you know, and transferring these viruses around and seeing how you can take a really bad one and transfer it to a human being. That's just horrible.
Who wakes up in the morning thinking this is a great way to make a living? You know, it's maybe we're missing something. But wouldn't it be? Well, first of all, one thing that I think is great about this exchange is that it shows that at least people are starting to look into some of these things, investigating. We don't have the answers. We don't know the answer to these questions necessarily. We do know that there were grants, and we've seen the grants. There's a great article on Zero Hedge yesterday talking about how the NIH spent $3.7 million on, quote, understanding the risk of bat coronavirus emergence. We don't know the answers, but it's good that people are starting to finally ask the questions. And the senator, we all owe a debt of gratitude for that. But Dr. Paul, wouldn't it be the ultimate irony that the one person who has been beatified as the great Saint Fauci for his handling of the virus outbreak was actually partially or totally responsible for the virus outbreak.
Well, yeah, and that's always a possibility. You know, the other thing is not, this has been going on, and you have to research these programs, how they get their money, because it's not in bold print. You don't say, oh, you know, this is the study that went to the CDC, because there was the organization called the Eco Health Alliance, and the money goes in there, and there are millions of dollars that do this, and but so people don't see it directly. But I get to thinking, you know, how can you be safe from this as a member of Congress, that they lie to you and you're appropriating money for something that is a very good government program, and it's not nearly as sinister as some others, and they're not naive enough, and then they go and vote for this, and then all of a sudden they shift it around. It's sort of like, can you trace everything the Fed does when they're bailing out people? Nobody can trace that thing. So they do this, and I got to thinking, well, it crossed my mind, well, one thing for sure, I never had to worry about that, because it's the big picture you look at. I wasn't voting for this stuff, so they weren't going to take anything that I voted for and they could transfer it into these kind of programs, because most of it's part of a big deal. You know, just like expanding a war. Oh yes, they did this. Well, but maybe we shouldn't even be involved and go to war without declaration and all these things. So they just, it sort of goes back to the rule of law, people actually believing that government should be restrained by what was written in the Constitution. But that is, people don't want to hear that. They want to know when the next check is going to come. Is it going to be $1,200 or $1,600?
Well, that's a great point, and really we had it lucky when we worked for you, because we didn't have to agonize over the fine print. We looked at the broader strokes. But you're absolutely right, and especially, you know, in foreign affairs where I mostly worked, you would have a foreign aid bill, and because we weren't allowed to, you know, directly fund a foreign political party, you'd look at the USAID thing, and there'd be a sub-grant to this NGO and a sub-grant to this NGO. You finally see what they're helping. They're helping a certain party over the other. So that's a great point. But I'm ready to close out if you think we've solved all the problems for today. I would just again talk to our viewers and thank them for tuning in, and also just to remind you, I look at the numbers all the time. And I often harangue you to please sign up for updates from the Ron Paul Institute. We do know that there's a lot of canceling going on, and there's a lot of disappearing going on, and we don't want to lose touch with you if that happens. So far, we only have about 8% of our subscribers to the YouTube channel also subscribe to RPI updates. As those of you who do subscribe know, we don't bombard you. You don't get something every day with some sort of a free offer or anything. We don't sell or rent your names at all. It's just between us, but we want to be able to keep in touch with you. I'll put a link after the show in the description of how you can easily sign up for updates so we can keep in touch. As you know, if you sign up for our YouTube channel, we don't know who you are. We don't have any way of contacting you to let you know where we're going if we're kicked off somewhere. We only know the number itself. So sign up for the Ron Paul Institute updates, and we'll know who you are, and you'll know who I are, and we can keep in touch. And thanks for watching. Yeah.
Good. I mentioned early on a little bit of my concern about how this Colonial Pipeline closure is going to affect us, because there's a question, who really was responsible for it, and how much is it going to cost, and what are they going to do to solve problems? Can politics get involved? Yeah, it certainly can get involved, because it's always involved. Is it going to cost money and expensive? Yes, it will. So, and it just adds on another item. We have this to deal with, and my question was, could it even be connected to all the other contrived economic problems that we're facing today with lockdown? And if it wasn't done on purpose that way, they certainly will take advantage of it, and things will be political. And one thing for sure, it's going to increase the budgets, and it's going to increase the inflation. The inflation is here, which we were warned about, and that's going to get a lot worse. But there is no indication that there will be a cutback, and I've argued the case they won't cut back under these conditions, because the immediate effect of this would be there will be a withdrawal symptom, but the withdrawal will come when the money quits working, and that's what inflation is all about, when the money's not working as well. And I have often made the statement that a country or an individual or a corporation that lives beyond its means is destined to live beneath its means, and I think that's what we're seeing today. If you look at it from a civil libertarian viewpoint, or if you look at it from a spending viewpoint, or a pricing point, or a taxation or control of us, yes, it's now definitely the evidence is there that the good days are sort of behind economically speaking. We've known that to be the case for the lower middle income group. They've been out in the streets, and there's been a lot of street people for a good many months already, and that's going to continue. So the only answer to these problems is to live within our means, and also work hard to understand and to promote a free society, because government bureaucrats, government politicians, special interest groups, they can't take care of us. All they can do is take care of themselves, and we pay the bill. The people end up paying the bill. But we see some of the opportunities now where people are admitting. We show that there's some articles that truth does break out, and eventually it has to, because we can't live with what we have, even though there are some that would like to continue it because they actually believe in Marxism, and they'd just as soon see our country move in that direction. But we're not at that point yet, but we still have to be very vigilant and work hard to promote the cause of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.